When someone asks what you do, you answer. You say the job, or the role, or the relationship, whatever makes the most efficient sense of you to a stranger. You say it automatically, before you've thought about whether it's true, before you've considered whether true is even the right standard to apply. That's not a criticism. That's just what it is. Social shorthand, a compressed file. Nobody wants the expanded version at a dinner party. But there's a different version of that same exchange where something else is happening. Not the shorthand, something more like a commitment, a small, quiet act of deciding that this is what you are. Not a description of yourself offered to a stranger, but a description of yourself offered to you. And once you've made that offer enough times, accepted it enough times, the thing you've been saying starts to feel less like shorthand and more like a fact. Less like a current choice and more like a prior condition. Something that was already the case before you decided anything. Jean-Paul Sartre had a name for the point where that slippage becomes a way of life. He called it Mauvaise Foi, bad faith, and he thought it was not a character flaw, not a mistake you could correct by thinking harder. He thought it was a structural temptation built into what it means to be conscious at all. The argument runs like this. Consciousness is strange. Unlike everything else in the world, a chair, a stone, a fact, consciousness always has a slight distance from itself. It can look at what it is, step back from it, ask whether to keep being it. This means that what you are, in any given moment, is never quite fixed. There's always a gap, always some air between you and the version of yourself you're currently performing. That gap is where freedom lives, and it's also, if you actually stop to feel it, vertiginous. Because it means there's no bottom, no nature underneath the choices that explains them. Just the choices all the way down. Most people, most of the time, find a way to not feel that. They find a role, a type, an identity, and they inhabit it so completely that the gap closes, or seems to. They stop looking at themselves from the outside and start simply being what they've decided they are. The word for this, in ordinary life, is stability. What Sartre wanted to call it was bad faith. Not because the role is wrong, not because identity is an illusion to be dissolved, but because the act of treating a chosen thing as a given thing, of taking something you're actively deciding and pretending it's something that was just there, prior to any decision, is a specific kind of untruth, not lying, something closer to refusing to notice. His famous example is a waiter. And by now that waiter has been discussed so many times in so many introductory philosophy courses that he's become a kind of mascot. So instead of him, think about the last time you caught yourself speaking about yourself in the third person, in your own head. Not literally, but in effect. The sense of, well, I'm the kind of person who doesn't do that. As if the kind of person who doesn't do that is a category with real edges, a box you were sorted into, rather than a shorthand for a set of choices you've been making and could, with enough friction, make differently. The box feels real. That's what makes bad faith work. It's not delusion. You're not confused about external facts. It's more like a sustained preference for a certain kind of description of yourself. One where you are already something rather than always becoming it. Because becoming is uncomfortable. Becoming means the next version of you is not yet decided, and the one after that less so. And somewhere out ahead of you, the thing that was supposed to be you dissolves into sheer possibility. Which is, when you actually let yourself feel it. Not freedom as liberation, but freedom as exposure. Simone de Beauvoir took this framework and pulled it somewhere. Sartre had not fully gone. She was less interested in the individual who retreats into a role than in what happens when the role is the only room you've been given. Her question was, what is bad faith for someone who grew up inside an identity they were told was their nature? Not a choice they were making, but a condition they were born into. Daughter, wife, the one whose life is organized around someone else's project. She was writing about women, specifically and without apology. But the structure she was identifying applies anywhere that a social order has a stake in certain people not noticing their freedom, which is a lot of places. The soldier who can't picture himself outside the uniform. The person from a certain kind of family who cannot, even in private, want something their family would call a betrayal. The professionals so fully merge with their function that retirement reads as an ending rather than an opening. De Beauvoir's point wasn't that these people were weak. It was that bad faith doesn't need your cooperation to get started. It can be installed before you have the vocabulary to name it, before the question of whether to accept it was ever made available to you. By the time you're old enough to ask, "Did I choose this?" the choosing has long been invisible. And here is where the argument knots up, and I want to stay in the knot rather than untie it, because I think the knot is where the real question lives. Sartre's claim that bad faith requires freedom, that you cannot deceive yourself without being, at some level, the author of the deception, is philosophically defensible. It holds. The act of not looking is still an act, the ongoing daily recommitment to a particular story about yourself, the decision each morning to not pull at that thread. That is something you are doing, even when it doesn't feel like doing anything at all. But de Beauvoir's correction is also right. Freedom is not evenly available as a felt experience. Some people are raised in conditions that make the thread almost impossible to find. You can be technically free in the way Sartre means, and practically sealed off from being able to exercise that freedom in any direction that matters. Those two things are not contradictions. They're both true at the same time. And the both at the same time is precisely what makes the question difficult and worth asking. What Sartre wanted, and kept returning to, and never quite resolved, was something he called authenticity. He didn't mean being yourself in the sense we now reach for that phrase, the therapy-adjacent, follow your passion version. He meant something colder, more demanding. He meant seeing the gap and not closing it, feeling the vertigo and choosing anyway, not once, as an event, but continuously, as a practice you keep having to re-enter because it keeps being easier to leave. There's a line near the end of Being and Nothingness, a book that is, to be honest, mostly very difficult to read, where Sartre says that a person in bad faith is not lying to themselves in the simple sense, because lying requires a part of you that knows the truth. Bad faith is more like, and this is my paraphrase, not his, a standing arrangement not to check. An agreement with yourself that has been in place so long you've forgotten signing it. I think about the agreements I haven't checked on in a while. The descriptions of myself I've been carrying around without asking whether they still have anything to do with what I'm actually choosing. The roles I perform with a precision that, on a good day, makes things run smoothly, and on a less good day, makes me wonder whose smoothness I'm optimizing for. I don't have a resolution for that. I don't think there is one, in the sense of a state you arrive at and stay in. What Sartre was pointing at was less like an answer and more like a question. You have to keep the nerve to keep asking. Who is this that I've been calling me? Is that what I am or what I've been doing? And if it's what I've been doing, have I been doing it freely? Have I been doing it at all, or has it just been happening, frictionless, mistaken for fact? The waiter is still relevant, by the way, just not as a cautionary tale, more as a mirror with a specific angle. You don't have to work in a cafe to recognize the performance. You just have to catch yourself once, moving through a room in a way that's a fraction too practiced, and wonder, briefly, who you're convincing.